Speak. Prosody rate equals 90%. Prepare to discover the chilling story of Isabel de Baviera, a queen accused of witchcraft and condemned the bonfire. Was it really guilty, or victim of a conspiracy? Subscribe and activate the bell so as not to miss anything. Prepare, because the story of Isabel de Baviera will leave you breathless. We talk about a queen, elegant and powerful, who reigned in the 14th century. His life, full of palatial intrigues, prohibited affairs and terrible accusations, is an impressive sample of cruelty and superstition of the time. Imagine a medieval court, full of luxury and power, but also of dark secrets and hidden hazards. Isabel, a woman advanced to her time, challenged the conventions of the time. He fell in love, married and ruled with a force and intelligence that made her an easy target for her enemies. His beauty, his independence and his power unleashed the envies and jealousy of many in court. In a world where women had to be submissive, Isabel rebelled, and that made her a danger to those who felt threatened by her. But Isabel's life took a dramatic turn when witchcraft accusations began to circulate in a deeply religious and superstitious society, where black magic was a terrible crime. An accusation of witchcraft was a death sentence. The queen, accused of heresy and practicing dark arts, found her trapped in a network of conspiracies and betrayals that would lead her to a tragic and unexpected end. Who was behind all this? Was it a conspiracy or a simple matter of bad luck? Imagine a little Isabel, born within a noble family Bavaria. His childhood passed between the walls of a medieval castle, surrounded by servants, company ladies, and the bustle of the court. Although she was a blue girl, her life was not exempt from the difficulties of the time. Common diseases, the precariousness of medicine, and the constant uncertainty of the feudal environment marked their first years. From an early age, Isabel received an education according to her status. He learned to read, write, and develop in the complexities of the court. He was taught by the crafts of a lady of her rank, such as embroidery, music, and dance. But he also received training in political strategy, a fundamental tool to survive in a world of intrigues and power. Despite its privileged position, life in court was not always easy. The rivalry between noble families, palatial conspiracies, and the constant struggle for power were a daily reality. Isabel, from a young age, learned to navigate in these turbulent waters, to observe, to analyze, and to remain silent when necessary. His mental acuity and adaptation ability were forged in the melting pot of courtly life. But life in the castle was not just children's games. You would become a key piece on the European political board. Your marriage to Federico IV, the King of Denmark and Norway, was planned precisely as a strategic alliance to strengthen the power of both families. Imagine the trip, the long road to a distant and unknown kingdom, leaving behind the familiarity of your Bavarian home. A new world was waiting for you, full of challenges and opportunities. The Danish court received you with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. You were a foreigner, an exotic piece in a complex power game. Federico, your new husband, was a strong man, perhaps distant at the beginning. The adaptation was not easy, culture and customs were different, but you, with your intelligence and determination, began to navigate the intricate waters of real politics. Little by little, you conquered the respect of the Danish nobles. Your political intelligence and your ability to weave alliances allowed you to consolidate your position. Over time, your influence in court grew up, becoming a key figure in the decisions of the kingdom. The union with Federico IV was not just a marriage, it was your rise to power, the beginning of a reign marked by ambition and, later, by the tragedy. Your arrival in Copenhagen was a whirlwind of new experiences. The castle, imposing and cold, received you with an atmosphere loaded with palatial intrigues. You quickly learned the complexities of the Danish court, a maze of alliances, rivalries and secrets whispered between tapestries and stone columns. You watched, listened, you learned to navigate the turbulent waters of real politics, while familiar with the customs and characters that surrounded you. The parties in the castle were lavish, with music, dances and banquets that lasted until late at dawn. But behind opulence, tensions and rivalries were hidden. You, with your ingenuity and your cunning, moved cautiously through that world, weaving strategic alliances, always alert the whispers and the glances of the hands that followed you everywhere. Life in court was a dangerous game, where each movement could have unpredictable consequences. Prosody? Speak. Speak. Prosody rate equals 90%. The cold of the Baltic Sea hit the walls of the castle, a constant reminder of the immensity and rawness of the outside world. Inside, however, the atmosphere was suffocating, a mixture of luxury and danger. You were in the center of everything, a young queen with an uncertain future, surrounded by courtiers who watched you, analyzed and judged you. Every day was a challenge, a new piece in the complex game of power that had to live. From the first day, you perceived the tension between the different features of the court. They talked in whispers, furtive looks followed you, and every smile seemed to hide a dagger. The queen, apparently friendly, kept a cold distance, watching everything with a penetrating look. You realized that loyalty was a scarce merchandise, and betrayal a refined art. Rumors flew like poisoned arrows. Some said that the queen was conspiring against the king, others that the king himself planned a coup d'état. You learned about the rivalries between the great noble families, each fighting for power and influence. The alliances changed with the wind's speed, and distrust was the norm. You discovered that even the humblest servants participated in the game of intrigues, that a simple casual comment, a furtively exchanged look, could contain crucial information. You learned to read between the lines, to decipher the meaning hidden behind friendly words and false smiles. Survival in the Danish court depended on your ability to navigate this sea of lies and deceptions. He appeared fragility, but his influence in court was undeniable. Isabel, with her beauty and cunning, wove a network of strategic alliances. You watched how, with a subtle gesture, a penetrating look or a carefully chosen word, I managed to tip the balance in its favor. His advisors, initially reluctant, became increasingly loyal, captivated by their intelligence and determination. Controlling the court meant controlling the information flow. You were witnessing how Isabel used her confidant network to get news before anyone else, allowing her to anticipate the plays of her enemies. His spies, discreet and efficient, whispered secrets, nourishing his political strategy with privileged information. But its influence was not limited to information. Isabel also skillfully handled the economic resources of the kingdom. He had a group of loyal financial ones that managed the real treasure at will, financing projects that expanded their power and weakened their opponents. You observed how each worn or inverted currency was one more piece in its complex power game. But Isabel's beauty and cunning were not enough in a world dominated by religion. You lived in a time of deep faith, where the church had immense power. The Inquisition, with its terrible judgments, was a constant threat to anyone who dared to question orthodoxy. The disputes between the papacy and the kings were frequent, and you were witnessing how the queen sailed between these political and religious storms, always seeking to maintain her position. Remember that the influence of the church in everyday life was overwhelming. Every aspect of your life, from your birth to your death, was governed by religious dogmas. Religious practices were essential for political survival, and any deviation, however minimal, could be interpreted as heresy. Isabel, although apparently devout, had to move carefully in that maze of beliefs and superstitions. The tension between the monarchy and the church was palpable. You saw how the queen tried to balance her political power with the need to maintain the approval of the clergy. A simple error, a malicious accusation, could be sufficient to trigger a defamation campaign with devastating consequences. In a world where witchcraft was a terribly common accusation, the line between politics and religion was blurred, and the queen walked on a tightrope. Imagine the court, a hotbed of intrigues and whispers. One day, a casual comment on a strange herb in the garden of Isabel, a plant that some said to possess magical properties. Perhaps it was a simple curiosity, an innocent observation, but in the atmosphere full of superstition of the time, it was enough to light a suspicion spark. Isabel's beauty, her intelligence, her influence, everything became suspicious in the eyes of those who envied her. Then the most direct accusations arrived. It was said that Isabel used enchantments to influence the king, that her spells were the reason behind the poor health of some nobles. People began to murmur, to weave an increasingly complex and dangerous rumors. Remember that at that time, the line between medicine and witchcraft was very diffuse, and any unusual practice could be interpreted as a threat. Prosody. Speak. Speak. The prosody rate equals 90%. These accusations, initially whispers in the palace halls, began to gain strength. Isabel's enemies, always vigilant, took the opportunity. They sowed doubt in the minds of the most influential, feeding fear and distrust. The growing wave of rumors became a tangible threat, a storm that hidden over the queen. But where did those accusations come from? It was a slow process, a snowball that started with small rumors. Remember the grass? Some associated it with witchcraft, a feared and misunderstanding practice. The superstition mixed with politics, and soon the whispers became more serious accusations, fed by those who saw in Isabel a threat to their interests. Think of the powerful enemies that Isabel had made during her reign. Ambitious, noble, political rivals who saw in the queen an uncomfortable figure, someone who clogged the way to power. For them, the accusation of witchcraft became a perfect weapon, a way of getting rid of an opponent without staining hands too much. The superstition of the time played a crucial role in a world where science was limited and blind faith prevailed. Belief in black magic and hidden practices was generalized. Any unusual event, any inexplicable disease, could be attributed to supernatural forces, and in this context, accusations against Isabel found a fertile terrain to grow. Remember that for the people of the time, witchcraft was not a fantasy, it was a terrifying reality. An evil force that could cause diseases, poor harvests, and even death. They firmly believed in the power of the devil and in their allies, the witches, capable of agreeing with him to obtain supernatural powers. Imagine the fear they had to feel when thinking about someone capable of launching curses, preparing poisonous potions, or controlling the weather. The practices attributed to witches were varied and often spooky. It was said that they flew in brooms, anointed with ointments made with herbs, some of them with hallucinogenic properties. It was believed that they participated in night affairs, secret meetings where they worshipped the devil. And of course, herbal collection, in particular those considered poisonous or with little-known medicinal properties, was directly associated with witchcraft. These beliefs, fed by superstition and the lack of understanding of natural phenomena, created an atmosphere of paranoia and fear. Any unusual thing, any inexplicated disease could be attributed to the evil action of a witch. And the accusation, once launched, was almost impossible to refute. Think about social pressure, religious pressure. How could you defend yourself against accusations so serious and so easily believed? Remember that Isabel de Baviera was not simply a queen. She was a woman who suffered. His symptoms were strange, disturbing. Seizures, hallucinations, delusions. For you, in the 21st century, this could suggest mental illness. But imagine the time, the 15th century. At that time, the most logical explanation, the most terrifying, was witchcraft. The doctors of the time did not have the tools to diagnose mental illnesses like today. For them, these strange behaviors were unequivocal signs. The influence of evil, his seizures, his visions, his erratic behavior, everything pointed to a demonic possession or a pact with dark forces. What other explanation did it exist? Think about Isabel's despair. Trapped in a body that failed her, in a mind that betrayed her, surrounded by superstitions and fears, without the understanding of a mental illness, their symptoms became their death sentence. The line between the disease and the accusation of witchcraft was blurred, becoming an irrevocable conviction. But imagine for a second, the 15th century. The Catholic Church was not just a religious institution, it was the dominant power. His clergy had an immense influence, even on the kings and queens, and when Isabel's symptoms became inexplicable, who would they go to find an explanation? The answer for the court was obvious. The Church, with its Inquisition, expert in detecting heresies and, of course, witchcraft. The Inquisition, with its almost absolute power, saw in Isabel's disease an opportunity to demonstrate your authority, to reaffirm your control over society. Even on royalty, remember, any deviation from the norm, any inexplicable behavior, could be interpreted as a demon signal, a witchcraft test. For the Church, Isabel's disease was not simply a disease. It was a threat to his order, to his dogma, to his power. And the way to neutralize that threat, to protect itself, was to condemn it. It didn't matter to be queen. The Inquisition had the power to judge it, to condemn it, even to execute it. /prosody /speak. Speak, prosody rate equals 90%. Think about the fear that reigned then. The Black Plague had decimated Europe, leaving behind a deep sense of vulnerability. People were looking for explanations, guilty to those who attribute misfortune. And there was the Church, with its powerful speech pointing to women, the old women who lived apart, as scapegoats. They were accused of agreeing with the devil, of launching curses, of causing diseases. They were times of superstition, where reason was diluted before terror. The Inquisition, with its relentless machinery, was responsible for investigating these accusations. The processes were unfair, based on forced testimonies, rumors, and superstitions. There was no place for defense. For the truth, if you were accused, your destiny was sealed. Confession, even under torture, was the only way to avoid bonfire. But in many cases, torture itself became the guilt test. The Inquisitor's manual, the Malleus Maleficarum, became the Bruges Hunt Bible. This treaty, full of fallacies and prejudices, detailed the methods to identify and persecute women accused of witchcraft. His fantasy and alarmist descriptions fed collective panic, turning any woman who came out of the common threat. Paranoia seized communities, and delation became a powerful weapon. Imagine the scene. A dark room, illuminated only by the faint light of candles. There, sitting around a rough table, there are inquisitors, severe and penetrating looks. You are witnessing how testimonies against Isabel de Baviera are presented. A peasant, trembling, describes an alleged potion that the queen gave him, ensuring that he caused a strange disease. Another, an old woman with a lost look, speaks of shadows and whispers in the castle, linking them to the figure of Isabel. But were those testimonies true? Social pressure, fear of the Inquisition, the thirst for revenge, many factors could influence the statements. Remember that witch hunt was in its peak, and an accusation, although false, could be enough to condemn someone. Think about the pressure on those who testified, the possibility of inventing stories to avoid being accused or even to take revenge on someone. Some historians speculate that political rivalry played a crucial role. Isabel, with her strong character and ambitions, had powerful enemies in court. Could those enemies have orchestrated a defamation campaign, using the fear of witchcraft as a weapon to get rid of it? It is a question that continues to resonate through the centuries, because the truth, after the smoke curtain of superstition and power, is difficult to discern. But imagine the situation. You are Isabel, accused of witchcraft, and you are in a cold and humid cell, without the possibility of defending yourself. There are no lawyers or witnesses in your favor, only the relentless look of the inquisitors. Your pleas, your protests of innocence, are lost in the silence of the night. The process is secret, a shadow game where the truth fades between rumors and suspicions. The lack of legal defense was a cruel reality in those times. That no noble, no friend could intervene in your favor. The trial was a controlled process, where justice twisted to satisfy the interests of those who accused you. Your rights, as queen, were simply ignored in this dark ritual. Your attempts to explain your innocence, by presenting evidence, were systematically ignored. The inquisitors, guided by prejudices and rumors, clung to the accusations, regardless of the lack of solid evidence against you. The truth became an irrelevant concept, overshadowed by power and manipulation. Imagine the scene. A coarse wooden table illuminated by candles that project dancers on it, a handful of dried herbs, presented as proof of your spells. Medicinal herbs you knew about your childhood, or sinister ingredients for malignant spells. The accusation will depend on the interpretation, the opinion of those who judge you, and you without voice. Then, a rag doll, grotesquely deformed, with nailed pins. A voodoo doll. They say a simple children's toy, or a terrible horrific instrument against the king. The test is not conclusive, but in that rarefied environment, anything can be interpreted as an irrefutable evidence of your guilt. The testimony of a maid, torn by fear and pressure, tells you to have seen strange night rituals. Vague words, without concrete, but enough details to feed the bonfire of suspicions. A simple confusion. An act of personal revenge. For your accusers, there are no doubt. But what role did the king play in all this? Was it a silent accomplice, observing how the accusation machinery crushed Isabel? Or, on the contrary, was he himself a victim, manipulated by ambitious courtiers who saw in the queen a threat to his power? The chronicles offer us an ambiguous image, full of silences and half-truths that hinder a definitive interpretation. Prosody, speak. Speak, the prosody rate equals 90%. Some historians point to the possible weakness of the king. A monarch perhaps too influenced by his directors, immersed in his own political intrigues and outside the true nature of the accusations against his wife. Imagine the king, plunged in doubt, unable to discern the truth between the accusations and the defense of Isabel. Others, however, argue that the king, aware of the falsehood of the accusations, allowed the trial as a way of getting rid of a queen who, for some reason, had become an obstacle to his plans, perhaps a queen too independent, too powerful, or simply uncomfortable for her political ambitions. Imagine the atmosphere of the time. Superstition camping at ease, people lived with constant fear of the supernatural, black magic, the influence of the devil. A simple rumor, an inexplicable disease, a bad harvest. Everything could be attributed to witchcraft. And you, in that context, are witnessing how the accusation against Isabel extends like gunpowder, feeding on fear and ignorance. Popular credulity was immense. The Church, with its absolute power, encouraged the idea of hell and eternal condemnation for sinners, and those who agreed with the demon people, desperate to find explanations to their problems, clung to the simplest, although cruel theories. Guilt always fell to someone, and in the case of Isabel, the accused queen was an easy prey. Think about the weight of public opinion that in a society where information was scarce and abundant misinformation. Social pressure was overwhelming. To accuse someone of witchcraft was a way to download collective frustration, to find a scapegoat for the evils that afflicted the community. And Isabel, with her position of power, became the perfect target of this blind fury. A sepulchral silence fell on the courtroom. The accusation, backed by doubtful testimonies and superstitions, had weighed more than any defense. You see Isabel, pale but firm, her eyes reflecting a mixture of disbelief and resignation. The weight of the crown, which once felt a symbol of power, now felt like a stone slab on his shoulders. The sentence resonated in the empty space, condemning it for heresy and witchcraft. The death sentence was relentless. There was no appeal or clemency. The Inquisition, with its relentless logic of the time, had ruled its destiny. Imagine the scene. The expectant crowd, a sea of gloomy and curious faces, mixed with fear. The verdict, although unfair, became a sentence without turning. The days before the execution were in agony. Isabel, deprived of her real privileges, faced her end with a mixture of bitterness and disbelief. Remember, for you, the image of the queen, stripped of her greatness, in the cold and dark cell, waiting for the final moment. The flame of hope had extinguished, leaving only the cold reality of his destiny. The fire, a symbol of purification for some, became its grave. The bonfire, an improvised funeral pyre, waited patiently. Imagine the final scene. Isabel, surrounded by a silent crowd, was consumed by the flames. Its history, a warning of the dangers of fanaticism and injustice, became a legend. The square was crowded. A sea of faces, a mixture of morbid curiosity and silent condemnation. You look pushed towards the bonfire. The smell of burned wood already reaches your nose. The fire, a hungry beast, waits. You feel the weight of the wood in your body, tied with thick strings, and the heat begins to be unbearable. Even before the flames reach you, you see the faces, blurred through the tears that your eyes burn, and you listen to a murmur that becomes a sepulchral silence when the torch approaches. The flames rise quickly, a hell that surrounds you. The heat is scorching, an infernal torrent that burns your skin, steals your breath. The cry you try to throw is drowning in the roar of the fire. The smoke fills your lungs, stifles you, and the vision becomes blurred, a red and black whirlwind. The pain is unbearable, an agony that consumes every cell of your being. But in the midst of that suffering, what do you really feel? The fire continues to devour everything, consuming your body, your soul. The creak of the wood, the sizzling of the flames, the silence of the crowd, everything is mixed in a single and terrible sound. Heat completely wraps you, consumes you. And then, at that last moment, before darkness covers you forever, what do you see? What do you remember? What do you feel? The fire consumed you, but the legend of Isabel de Bavaria just started. They say that his spirit, rebellious and indomitable even in death, vague around the castle. Some peasants claim to have seen her, a ghostly figure with a flame dress, protecting the innocent or punishing the evils. Reality or superstition fed by fear and posthumous admiration. /prosody. /speak. Speak. Prosody rate equals 90%. Years later, it was reminded of not only as a witch, but as a martyr. Your execution became a symbol of injustice, a story that was transmitted from generation to generation, muttering your name with a mixture of horror and respect. The legends about your soul in sorrow were intertwined with the stories of hidden treasures, curses, and prophecies that were mysteriously fulfilled. Some say that your spirit still protects the place where you perished, watching from the shadows, while others talk about appearances on the nights of full moon, an elegant and funeral spectrum that remembers the queen who was. The truth is lost in time, blurred between reality and fiction, creating a mystery that lasts to this day. Have you become a legend, or are you just a ghost of memory? Centuries later, who really was Isabel de Baviera? For some, a victim of intolerance and medieval superstition, a powerful woman who challenged the rules of her time and paid the highest price. For others, a dark figure, wrapped in rumors and accusations that, although unfounded, left an indelible stain in their memory. What do you think? The truth, as is usually the case, is probably at an intermediate point. Her death, a brutal act that made her a martyr for some and an example for others, left a complex and ambiguous legacy. The story remembers it, judges it, the misrepresentation. And you, knowing it through this video, you are the final judge in its history. Its history, full of mystery and controversy, reminds us of the fragility of truth and ease with which accusations can destroy a life. Isabel became a symbol, a warning, a legend, but also in a reflection on the power, justice, and intolerance of a dark era. But what really say historical sources about Isabel? Imagine that you have access to the files of the time. You would find letters, legal documents, even chronicles written by monks and nobles. Some records describe Isabel as an intelligent and powerful woman, capable of handling the affairs of the kingdom. Others, written by their enemies, paint it as a dark and dangerous figure, a witch that conspired against the church and the nobility. It is crucial to analyze these sources with a critical eye, right? Remember that each document is dyed for the perspective of who wrote it. A real chronicler could favor the official version, minimizing rumors about witchcraft. On the other hand, an anonymous witness, perhaps someone who feared or envied her, could exaggerate her actions to justify her conviction. The lack of overwhelming evidence further complicates the panorama. Many of the testimonies against Isabel are second or third hand, rumors and gossip that were amplified over time. The absence of physical tests such as potions or spells makes it difficult to separate the reality of the black legend that was woven around it. What information is reliable and what is simple propaganda? If we review the archives of the European Inquisition, you will see that the accusation of witchcraft was not something exceptional. Thousands of women, and some men, were judged and convicted throughout Europe for centuries. Remember the case of Juana de Arco, a French national heroine accused of heresy and witchcraft or witch hunts in Salem, although this already in a later period. The fear of the unknown, to the disease, to the bad harvests, was often channeled towards female figures, considered more vulnerable and easy to manipulate. The process against Isabel, although brutal, was still established patterns. Confessions were sought, often under torture, testimonies, often interested or false, were collected, and circumstantial tests were used, such as the possession of medicinal herbs or the reputation of being a different person, to support the accusations. You will wonder if the similarity between judicial procedures was chance. It really wasn't. Think of the social prejudices of the time. Patriarchy, fear of different, superstition and ignorance. These elements were combined to create a climate of terror where the accusation of witchcraft was a powerful tool to eliminate unwanted people, or simply to justify violence and oppression. Isabel's case, although tragic, helps us understand the complexity of witch hunt in Europe and how this mechanism worked. But think of a woman's life in the Middle Ages. His options were limited, right? Marry, usually with someone chosen by their family, to ensure economic and social stability. Most were dedicated to home tasks, raising children and managing the house, an exhausting work and without public recognition. If you were fortunate, you could help in the family business, but always under the authority of a man, whether your father, your husband, or a brother. You had little control over your own destiny. Your decisions were conditioned by the social expectations and religious norms of the time. Prosody, speak. Speak, the prosody rate equals 90%. Education was a privilege for the women of the nobility, but even they were limited to domestic arts and religion. For most, literacy was an unattainable luxury. Your future was predetermined by your genre, and the possibilities of escaping that reality were scarce, almost non-existent. In this context, understand the story of Isabel de Baviera, and the accusations against him, requires that you see the complete panorama. His life, his actions, and his tragic end were deeply influenced by the limited and pre-established role that medieval society had assigned to him. But what happened to Isabel after his death? Initially, its story was told as an example of heresy and madness. He portrayed it as a threat, a witch who deserved her tragic end. Imagine you, the propaganda of the time, painting it as a monster, amplifying its errors to justify its execution. His image became a warning symbol, a lesson for women who dared to challenge the established order. However, over the centuries, the perspective on Isabel began to change. The new generations, with a vision less influenced by the church and its powerful propaganda machinery, began to question the official narrative. He began to investigate his life with greater objectivity, seeking to understand the historical and political context that surrounded it. Some historians began to see in it not a witch, but a victim of power. Today, Isabel de Baviera is a fascinating and complex character, a case study on the power, religion, and oppression of women in the Middle Ages. Its history has become a source of inspiration for artists, writers, and historians seeking to reinterpret the past. It is no longer only the burned witch alive, but a symbol of the struggle for justice, a character that invites reflection on the injustices of the past and its resonance in the present. His legacy is a reminder of the importance of questioning the dominant narratives and seeking the truth, however complex it is. But history, like a winding river, has changed its course. New investigations have reviewed the accusations against Isabel. Forgotten documents and dusty files have come to light, offering different perspectives on their life and their tragic end. Letters, testimonies have been found, even details about the political intrigues of the court, which paint a much more complex picture than was believed. Some historians now argue that witchcraft accusations were a political tool to destabilize their reign and weaken their position in court. The rivalry between noble features, the struggles for power, and dynastic disputes played a crucial role in their conviction. You can start seeing that the story they told you was not so simple. The lack of forceful evidence against her, the nature of the testimonies, and the political manipulation that surrounded the judicial process have led many to question the legitimacy of their conviction. Nowadays, it is discussed if he was the victim of a conspiracy, a strategy to separate her from power and silence her voice. The image of a witch queen has begun to fade, giving way to a more human, more complex, and more tragic figure. Imagine the scene: the flames devouring Isabel, a terrifying show that set the collective memory over fire. His death, declared heresy, was not an isolated ascetic. It served as a warning, a brutally clear message for anyone who dared to challenge the established power, both religious and political. Fear extended as a shadow, silencing dissidents and consolidating the control of the church and the nobility. Isabel's execution not only had an impact on the population, it also generated political tensions. The nobility, divided by its own ambitions, saw in the burning of Isabel an opportunity to reorganize alliances and consolidate its power. Some took advantage of the situation to eliminate rivals, creating a climate of uncertainty and instability in the court. The political consequences of the execution were deep and lasting, remodeling the map of power. At the social level, Isabel's burning generated a climate of paranoia and suspicion. Witchcraft accusations became more frequent, feeding fear and intolerance. People lived with the constant fear of being pointed out, accused, and unjustly convicted. The idea that the dissent was strengthened, however small, could have fatal consequences. The society became more rigid and controlled, imposed by terror. But was a witch really Isabel? That is the question that has divided historians for centuries. Some defend that he was the victim of a political conspiracy, an uncomfortable nobleman eliminated by his enemies. Imagine the palatial intrigues, the rivalries for power, the accusations launched as poison darts. Prosody, speak. A prosody rate equals 90%. Others, however, cling to the records of the time, to the evidence presented in their trial, however questionable they are today. For them, the condemnation, although unfair in their process, reflected the beliefs of the time. Superstition, fear of the unknown, which hunt as a mechanism of social control. Think about the terror that inspired the idea of black magic. The truth is probably at some intermediate point. Maybe Isabel was an uncomfortable figure, yes, but also a victim of a deeply unfair judicial system and a superstitious mentality. The lack of irrefutable evidence, political manipulation, and social pressure contributed to their tragic conviction. It is a complex story, full of nuances, which invites us to question official narratives and understand the historical context. Imagine Isabel. Was it a strong, independent woman, perhaps even a bit rebellious for her time? Some historians suggest that their personality, strong and challenging, collided with the rigidity of the court. Perhaps her intelligence and her ability to make decisions made her a threatening figure for those who sought control. Think of a woman who dares to challenge the rules. How would the society of the time react? Its apparent coldness, described by some chroniclers, could be interpreted as a survival strategy in a hostile world, in an environment where the woman should be submissive. Could her apparent lack of emotion be a mask to protect themselves from constant danger? Or was perhaps simply an introspective woman, misunderstood by society? Perhaps his religiosity, sometimes described as extreme, was a way of finding comfort and control in a chaotic world. Or perhaps it was manipulated by religion itself, becoming a scapegoat for larger political problems. Remember that the accusation of witchcraft was a powerful tool in that context. Have you stopped to think about the social pressure facing a woman from her position? The weight of the crown, the palatial intrigues, the constant threat of betrayal, all this could contribute to a psychological collapse, erroneously interpreting as madness or witchcraft. What would happen if all these pressures accumulate in one person? But what if the official story was not the complete truth? Imagine for a moment that witchcraft accusations were just a smoke curtain to hide something darker. Some historians pose the possibility of a mental illness, perhaps a psychosis that made it behave erratically, interpreting their actions as the demon's work. Think of symptoms, how their behavior could have been confused with black magic acts. Another hypothesis, just as fascinating and terrifying, points to poisoning. At that time, medicine was rudimentary, and poisons a common weapon. Perhaps someone, moved by envy, power, or simple revenge, slowly administered some toxic substance that affected his mind and body, causing strange behaviors that were misunderstood. What would happen if your madness really were the result of subtle poisoning? These hypotheses, although speculative, force us to question the official narrative. Remember that history is written by the victors, and in medieval times, the church had absolute power. Was Isabel victim of a conspiracy, a victim of a misunderstood or silent poisoning? The truth, perhaps, was lost in the flames of the bonfire, leaving behind an enigma that still intrigues us today. Think of the 15th century in Denmark. A period of internal struggles for power, of ambitious nobles and changing alliances. The Danish monarchy, although powerful, did not have absolute control over the whole kingdom. The powerful noble clans constantly competed for influence and lands, creating a climate of political instability that could even affect the queen's life. The king, although the supreme ruler nominally, was often forced to negotiate and give in to the demands of these powerful clans. The influence of the church was also significant, with bishops and archbishops exercising considerable political and economic power. Imagine the complex networks of loyalty and rivalries that were woven in court, a scenario where an accusation of witchcraft could be used as a political weapon. In this context of instability, an accusation of witchcraft against a queen, such as Isabella de Bavaria, could be a very effective tool to destabilize the kingdom, eliminate a rival, or consolidate the power of a certain group. Remember that the accusations were not always true, and many times they served as a pretext to achieve broader political objectives. Maybe the story they have told about Isabel is not the complete story. Prosody /speak. Speak, prosody rate equals 90%. Imagine the Danish court, an intrigue boiler. You are there, observing how alliances between the members of the royal family are woven and undone with the same speed as the wind changes direction. The king, with his own interests, seeks to strengthen his position, weaving strategic alliances with powerful nobles, sometimes even against the will of his own children. The rivalries between brothers, those silent struggles for the real favor, were constant. Each sought their own path to power, weaving their own networks of influence, forming secret alliances and plotting strategies to overcome their brothers. The ambition and the need to ensure the future of their own family branches were at stake. These family disputes were not limited to men. The women of royalty, despite their apparent secondary position, played a crucial role in these alliances and conflicts. Through strategic marriages, they could ensure power for their families, influencing political decisions and weaving networks of influence that were sometimes more powerful than those of their husbands or brothers. Think of the delicate balance of power, in the fragility of alliances, the betrayals and conspiracies that were created in the shadow and the heart of the Danish royal family. A perfect storm was cooked, a struggle for power that would end up having devastating consequences, not only for the royal family, but for the whole kingdom. But what happened to Isabel's legend after her death? It became a fascinating figure, a tragic queen, unfairly accused. Its history was woven in the tapestry of Danish popular culture, transmitted from generation to generation through ballads, stories, and legends. Imagine the peasants gathered around the fire, their faces illuminated by the flames, listening carefully to the story of the convicted queen. In those stories, Isabel often became an almost mythical figure, a victim of cruelty and injustice. Sometimes, the legend presented her as a powerful and dam witch, other times as an innocent trapped in a palatial conspiracy. The flexibility of the narrative allowed each narrator to add their own interpretation, enriching the legend with new details and nuances. The image of Isabel, burned alive, became a symbol of oppression and injustice. Its history served as warning, but also as inspiration. A warning against excessive ambition and manipulation of power, but also an inspiration for those who fought against injustice. His figure transcended the official history, becoming a powerful metaphor. Imagine, for a moment, the few artistic representations that survived over time. These images, often fragmented or deteriorated, offer us flashes of how Isabel looked at an imposing queen, with the face marked by sadness and injustice. Or perhaps a woman of classical beauty, with real dignity reflected in her eyes. Think of the paintings, surely with colors off, reflecting the austerity of the time. Thick brushstrokes, perhaps, or the thorough details that tried to capture the essence of their personality. A face that, through the centuries, has been interpreted in 1,000 different ways, depending on the artist and the context of his work. And the sculptures, can you imagine a statue of Isabel? Perhaps an imposing figure, stone or wood, dressed in real clothes, with a face that transmits the strength of his spirit, despite the tragedy that consumed it. Or perhaps a smaller, more intimate image that reflects the human fragility of an unfairly accused queen. These representations, although scarce, are windows to a distant past. They are artistic testimonies that, despite time and destruction, still allow us to glimpse the figure of Isabel de Bavaria, the unjustly accused queen of witchcraft, the queen who history and art try to rescue from oblivion. But how has the story of Isabel arrived to us? Through literature, of course. Think of the historical novels that rescue her from oblivion, rebuilding her life from fragments of information, filling the gaps with the imagination, but always trying to stay faithful to the known facts. Some present it as an innocent victim, others as a powerful and ambitious woman, capable of everything to maintain her position. There are also poems that dedicate verses, sometimes praising its beauty and intelligence, sometimes lamenting its tragic destiny. Imagine the strength of those words, transporting you to the time, to court, murmurs, and accusations. These poems, often unknown to the general public, offer an intimate and poetic vision of their life. Prosody /speak. Prosody rate equals 90%. And, of course, the theater. Think of the works that could have been represented in their time, or in which they have written centuries later, inspired by their history. Visualize the actors playing their role, recreating the key moments of their life, from their arrival to the court to their trial and execution. How will they represent it? How a heroine or as a villain? But Isabel's fascinating story does not stay alone in the books. Imagine seeing her on the big screen, right? Cinema and television have tried, with greater or lesser success, to capture their tragic life. Some films and series have portrayed her as an innocent victim, manipulated by a court full of intrigues. Others, on the other hand, have deepened in rumors and accusations, presenting a more ambiguous image, leaving the viewer the task of judging. Think about the possibilities. The tension of the court, the trial, the burning in the bonfire. A whole visual show. Although there are no cinematographic adaptations exclusively dedicated to their life, many period films include similar elements, characters with their same characteristics, or scenarios that transport you directly to their world. You realize how the essence of its history, even if it is not the main protagonist, permeates in other stories. You may imagine a scene in which Isabel, with her pale face and full of fear, faces her accusers. A group of nobles with accusatory looks. Or maybe you imagine the bonfire, the fire consuming everything around her, while she, with an expression of resignation or even force, faces her destiny. Those images, although product of your imagination, are possible thanks to the cinematographic references that transport you to the time. Think of the injustice that Isabel suffered. Condemned without solid evidence, victim of a society that saw witches in each corner. Its history reminds us how fragile justice can be, especially in times of superstition and ignorance. The ease with which the truth was manipulated, the lack of a fair process. How many other Isabel died without anyone listening to them? Isabel's story serves as a mirror that shows us the importance of questioning the dominant narratives, of seeking the truth beyond prejudices. Remember that the story is written by the victors, and that often the voices of the victims are silenced. Have you wondered how many stories like Isabel's remain hidden in the shadows of the past? Today, with access to the information we have, we can review and reassess these stories that we can give voice to the silenced, to those who were unfairly condemned. Isabel's story reminds us of the need for impartial justice, based on evidence and respect for human rights. A legacy that, unfortunately, remains a fight in our present. Surely you wonder, what evidence did they really have? The truth is that few, very few, they were based on rumors and doubtful testimonies, in the paranoia of an era that saw witchcraft everywhere. Remember that the Inquisition was booming, and the accusation of witchcraft was a powerful tool, often used to get rid of uncomfortable enemies or heirs. And her husband, Carlos VI. What role did he play in all this? Well, there is the key to everything. Carlos VI was mentally unstable, and his reign was marked by recurring crises. Some historians suggest that the accusation against Isabel was a way to destabilize it, to separate her from power, and to consolidate the power of those who conspired against her. Many wonder if she really was burned alive. Historical sources are not entirely clear about it. Some stories speak of a public execution, others of confinement and death in prison. Confusion is part of the mystery surrounding its tragic story. What we do know is that its end was horrible and that his life was another victim of intolerance and superstition. Finally, what can we learn from the history of Isabel de Baviera? His case serves us as a powerful reminder of the importance of justice, the danger of accusations without evidence, and how superstition and power can manipulate truth and destroy innocent lives. His story should teach us to be more critical and to always question what they tell us. I hope you enjoyed the story of Isabel de Baviera. If you liked it, give like and subscribe for more. What do you think? Leave it in the comments. /prosody/speak